In the 1850s, America was an absolute powder keg, just barely held together by the most fragile of compromises. We're about to explore how just two sparks, a single court case and a violent raid, finally lit the fuse and plunged the nation right into its bloodiest conflict, the Civil War.
So you have to ask, right? How could one court ruling and one man's failed raid possibly tear an entire country apart? Well, it's because these weren't just random events. Oh no, these were the moments that finally forced every single American to pick a side, completely destroying any last chance for compromise. To really get how that compromise shattered, we have to understand just how shaky the whole thing was to begin with. You see, in the 1850s, the United States wasn't just divided, it was like a nation walking a tightrope over a massive canyon. For decades, this one law, the Missouri Compromise, was basically the glue holding the country together. It was this complex deal that drew a literal line across the map of America's western territories. Simple idea. South of the line, slavery could expand. North of it, it was banned. The whole goal was just to keep the number of free and slave states equal and, maintain a very, very delicate peace. But here's the thing. This was always a temporary fix. Because the North and the South were becoming two completely different worlds. The North was industrializing, its economy built on free labor. The South's entire economy, its culture, its whole way of life, was built on the institution of slavery. So for one side, slavery was a moral evil that had to be contained. For the other, it was a constitutional right that had to be protected and expanded, no matter the cost. So into this incredibly tense atmosphere comes the first major shockwave. And it isn't delivered by a politician or a general. Nope, it comes from the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court. And it all centers on this man, Dred Scott. He was an enslaved man whose owner took him to live for years on free soil, in places where the Missouri Compromise had actually outlawed slavery. So, believing this made him a free man, he sued. His case slowly wound its way up through the courts, and finally, it landed at the Supreme Court. And on March 6, 1857, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney delivered a decision that was, and I'm not exaggerating here, a legal earthquake. It didn't just decide Dred Scott's personal fate, it tried to settle the question of slavery in America once and for all. The court's ruling was absolutely devastating, and it came in three parts. First, it said that Dred Scott, as a black man, was not a citizen and could never be one. And because of that, he had no right to even sue in court. Second, it declared that enslaved people were property, just like a horse or a chair, and that property was protected by the Constitution. And then third, this was the bombshell, it found the Missouri Compromise itself unconstitutional. This meant Congress had zero power to stop slavery from spreading into any U.S. territory. For the South, this was a total, complete victory. For the North, it was an outrageous betrayal. But the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, he saw something else entirely. He actually predicted that this horrible decision might be the very thing needed to eventually destroy slavery itself. What incredible foresight. So, with the legal path to stopping slavery now completely blown up by the Supreme Court, some abolitionists felt that only one option remained: violence. And that is when John Brown steps onto the stage. John Brown was a man who truly believed he was on a divine mission from God to destroy slavery. So on a fall night in 1859, he led a raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry. The plan? Seize all the weapons and spark a massive slave rebellion that would spread across the South. But the plan failed, just spectacularly. Brown and his men were quickly surrounded, trapped, and captured. Brown was tried for treason and hanged. But in his trial and in his death, he became something way more powerful than a failed raider. To so many in the North, he was a hero, a courageous martyr. But to the South, he became the face of all their deepest fears. Okay, so now we have our two events, a court decision and a violent raid. And the most important thing to understand isn't just what happened, but how each side saw these events in completely different ways. This chart, it lays out the divide perfectly. Take the Dred Scott decision. The South saw it as a massive legal victory. Slavery was now protected everywhere. But the North saw a corrupt Supreme Court that had been hijacked by what they called the slave power. Then you've got John Brown's raid. The South saw terrifying proof that abolitionists wanted to arm the enslaved and destroy them. The North, they saw a hero who died fighting for freedom. You see, the exact same events creating two totally irreconcilable realities. After these two events, there was simply no room left for negotiation. The middle ground was gone. It had completely evaporated. The South felt the law was on their side, but that they were under physical attack. The North felt the law had been corrupted, and that radical action was the only moral response left. The center had completely collapsed.
And from this point forward, the path to war becomes a direct and tragically short one. All the pieces were now in place for the final, terrible break. You can just see the chain reaction so clearly here. 1857, the court destroys any hope of a legal compromise. 1859, the raid convinces the South that they can't trust the North and that violence is coming. So, when an anti-slavery candidate, Abraham Lincoln, wins the presidency in 1860, that is it. That's the final straw. For the South, his election is a direct threat to their entire existence. So secession begins, and the war follows. So we end right where we started. One court case, one failed raid. Each event just slammed another door on the possibility of a peaceful solution. The legal system had sided with slavery, and a violent attempt to fight it had failed. It leaves us with a really tough question to think about. At that point, with the nation so fundamentally and passionately divided, was there any other way out?